Hey folks, Galen here. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that our 2025 Project Manager Salary Survey is now live. We use this survey to help PMs all over the world get the info they need to get a clear sense of their earning potential. By adding your story to the survey, you're contributing to valuable research that will give you and our entire PM community better pay transparency as you progress through your careers. And once the results are in, we'll send you the full report. To participate, head on over to thedpm.com/salary2025. All right, on with the show. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. My name is Galen Low with the Digital Project Manager. We are a community of digital professionals on a mission to help each other get skilled, get confident, and get connected so that we can amplify the value of project management in a digital world. If you want to hear more about that, head on over to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership. All right, today we are talking about what it takes to transition from project delivery to project consulting, and also exploring whether that's actually becoming one of the only viable options for long-tenured senior project leaders as they approach the later stages of their career. With me today is Stephanie Best, someone who has made that transition herself from being a director of project management to becoming an executive operations consultant at her own consulting firm, Greannmhar Consulting. Stephanie, thanks for being with us today.
Galen, it's a pleasure, and I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Oh, I'm so honored. I love our chats. We were just jamming in the green room, having a bunch of laughs, going way off topic, but we're centering back here. And I'm really excited just to kind of, share with my listeners your story, but also what I see as maybe not a trend, but overall a sort of fresher option or evolving option of moving from sort of day-to-day project management into sort of a more consulting role and what that entails. You've made that journey yourself. So I thought maybe I would start with like a big question and then like zoom out and work backwards towards the big question. The big question for me is this. More and more, consulting seems to be the logical path for seasoned project professionals as they progress through their career. Do you see it that way? And if so, why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I have seen that more and more project professionals who are maybe midpoint in their career are taking a step back and looking at their different options, like whether or not they want to be a full-time employee or if they want to be an independent contributor or a consultant. So yes, I do see it that way. It's kind of, some people are career project managers and really pursue as many lifer opportunities as possible. But I do see more and more in my circle, this variety happening. And I do think that many forces are at play here. So throughout the years, as we develop this powerhouse of skills and specialized knowledge in niche areas, consulting is a natural next step for established project professionals. And it really leverages their expertise, offers greater impact and flexibility. And there is a demand for consultants and advisors, so people can build a profitable mid to late career this way. And so I find that as people are exploring these different options, there's also just more normalcy, in that. And also, don't you find that more than ever, we're confronted with the culture of entrepreneurship? Like when you're scrolling through your phone, so we see it flicker everywhere when we scroll, which is perhaps on average 4.5 hours a day. And this exposure has an influence. Where we look is naturally where we go. And personally, I see fascinating possibilities as well as an accoutrement, use a cliche word, of things to think really critically about that maybe say, hey, you can really do this, start your own side gig, start your own consultancy, et cetera, et cetera. But then what that looks like in actuality really varies person to person based on their network, their career, their skills, their experience, their personality. So many different factors are at play.
I love those two things together. Like, I have noticed a bit of an upturn in this sort of being an entrepreneur, especially like post-pandemic. Like our view of work is a little bit different, right? Like, and I think everyone, not just professionals in the sort of mid stages of their career or late stages of their career, but it was kind of like, okay, yeah, it was already gig economy. And then we were kind of forced to be like, what if this all falls apart, right? Maybe we should have some kind of entrepreneurial sort of safety net or plan B or maybe plan A. And then that's a really good point about the feed, right? And then you're seeing, and I do it as well, right? LinkedIn is a sort of running billboard of people who have their own, practice or consultancy or training or book or whatever. Some of them are sharing their thoughts just because they want to. A lot of them are sharing their thoughts to build awareness of their company and what they do. So you do get exposed to that like hours a day. But I think the thing I love the most is what you said first, which is that as project managers, we actually get exposed to a lot of business stuff and aspects of a business and like how stuff works. We are in some ways this sort of operational octopus that kind of like
That's a
gets
good
into
one.
everything, right? You know how like the tech team works, you worked with creative, like comms and marketing, you're reporting up to executives, you're kind of getting a sense of it. And so if you've got your eyes peeled, is that what we say?
Yeah, I think
If you
those
keep
were
your eyes
highlighted.
open.
Yeah, I think you can feel those. Yeah, it's
It's a
great.
strange visual, eyes peeled, isn't it? Anyways, if you're keeping your eyes open, your eyes and ears, and you're listening and you're absorbing stuff, then throughout your career, you can accrue a lot of knowledge about how businesses work and operate. And not to say that you have this sort of, you just get an MBA just by being a project manager, but you do get this perspective of like how things get done. And it kind of is a bit unique in the sense that then you could say, you know what? I see how the decision-making process and how our goals manifest. I see how all this plugs together. I think I
Yeah,
could help, advise, at least starting as like maybe a project consultant. I understand how projects should be put together to achieve your goals. And then like incrementing upwards towards being more what your consultancy does, which is kind of executive coaching and consulting inside and outside of projects.
I love how you frame that. Yeah, I completely agree.
I wonder if we could zoom out because I think maybe that is a good opportunity to talk about your story. I'm curious about your own journey just from project manager to executive consultant. What drove you to make that change from being an employee to an entrepreneur? And like, what was your first step? When did it become like plan A, not just like plan B or like a dream that you had on your vision board?
I made so many vision boards. I found an app for it. Um,
Okay, well, we'll link it in the notes.
yeah, absolutely. I stopped using it. I don't know, but it's great.
You achieved your vision.
Yeah, I guess so. A version of it. Life is what happens when you're making plans, right? Going back, I just want to quickly address one thing that you mentioned in the last question is that, yes, as we accumulate all this knowledge and skills, we become really strategic because of our exposure to so many cross functions. And then we can step away and think, well, I have a business case for essentially my package of services based on my exposure, experience, education, etc. Right? So I think that's a really wise thing that you said, and it's quite accurate. Like that's something that people can leverage in their careers and gives them a little bit more autonomy in their decision making. Back to your question. So what drove me to make the change from being an employee to entrepreneur, and what was my first step? Yeah, so it always looks really different. I think person to person, different entrepreneurial journeys, and it looks different based on your exposure, your risk tolerance, sometimes even your gender, right? So here's my answer for it anyway. I had always seen myself as a business owner, and yet I had spent many years in corporate for large firms, some multinational, and then I switched to medium-sized agencies and I grew a little smaller too with some of the agencies. So I kind of shrunk down. Some people work their way up, and I worked my way into like a variety of different sizes of organizations. And I realized each role that I had served in had a very common theme. So people can only do their best when the system they're in supports them. So when there's a lot of work about work, when there's a lot of roadblocks and barriers, their job becomes more hindered and cumbersome. And it's really difficult for them to find meaningful careers when they're just tied up in bureaucracy day in and day out, right? So then I worked my way through administration, project coordination, senior project management, business analyst, then director of projects and director of sales. And in each role, I gravitated towards resolving operational issues for the betterment of people and profits. It just was a common theme. I noticed that things were always getting in the way of our ability to drive value. And that a large percentage of my job, no matter what it was trying to navigate operations issues or combating it so that I can actually get my stuff done. Like you've probably heard the phrase work about work. Like does this meeting need to be an email or inbox zero? All of that stuff is work about work, right? And there's a way that you can optimize your operations through mapping and communications that you can cut a lot of that just based on how you want to work and how you want to deliver value, which is why I became completely obsessed with this. So I became completely obsessed. So my first step was fatal. in that I doubled the sales portfolio of one of the last firms that I'd worked for. So I developed a strategy and the team executed it really effectively. However, the delivery engine was not able to keep up with the growth, and we agreed on a package at the end of the day. So ultimately, it was a preventable operations issue that we saw written on the walls, and the team needed to adapt. We had a large demand for a product that we sold, but now we're backed up by many months to a year in our ability to meet market demand because of scalability and because of operations, you know? So with some time on my hands, I designed a system and built a toolbox, which ultimately helps professional service firms empower their people by removing the roadblocks to success and drive growth. So that's a little bit about my journey. But there's some personal elements to that as well. Like for 16 years, I struggled with an undiagnosed autoimmune disease. I faced discrimination on my maternity leaves. I have two kids, right? So there's a lot of different hurdles and things that inspired me to think, well, I'd really like to build something for myself and, be able to make these decisions on my own. However, this experience has been incredibly informative, transformative, and incredibly challenging at the same time, right? It's not easy to build something from scratch, and you really start to know the meaning of the phrase, your network is your net worth, when you take the plunge.
Honestly, I love that story. I love it when someone from project management or delivery or operations or, other parts of the business as well get into sales. Because, you have that thing that's kind of like, if we get lots of sales, well, that's a good problem to have. And in your case, it sounds like it was not a problem that could be solved quickly enough. It's like, that's great. We have all this new business coming in, but we operationally cannot support it and we're falling apart. And you kind of have that perspective of like, if only delivery was going well, if only I could do that thing I love to do, like unblock people from unnecessary work, then some of these bottlenecks would be resolved. Did you feel like you said you kind of put together your toolkit of what your offering would be? And at that point where you're like, yeah, I've done this before? Or was it kind of more like, I'm kind of putting some stuff together that is an offering, but I've never delivered this offering in my role?
Ooh, that was really interesting. Well, I had to see the patterns in my career of what was most pertinent, what was the hair on fire problem that I was solving. So when I put together my toolkit, I definitely upped my certifications because I was doing something that I had practiced for about 15 years within project management, within strategy. However, I realized that there was a certification called DAPSIC or Disciplined Agile Value Stream Consultant. And it's like project meets ops at the C-suite level. And you map the value chain and you assess it for optimizing value delivery to your clients. And so there was a bit of both. I looked at what I could do. I looked at what could give me more clout and credibility. And what also was something that I felt happy doing every single day, right? There's a lot of things that we end up doing in our careers for many years that we're very good at that we no longer want to be known for or attached to or perform, right? So sometimes it is taking a leap of faith and getting some new skills or exposure and trying things out, on the side if you're full-time employed or something, just exploring it and take the long route. Slow wins are still very much wins, right? So long story short, it was a bit of both.
What I love about your story is the mix of things, right? It's kind of like, okay, let me look at all the pieces and do they make a puzzle? And is there a business case here? Like, will I be valuable? Will I be successful at this? Like, is this a sort of compelling offer?
Mm-hmm.
So that I can then take this and create a lifestyle where there is a little bit more flexibility and freedom, as I guess the words that people would use. But, it resonates strongly with me, what you said about your undiagnosed autoimmune disease, right? An invisible condition that you are getting sort of discriminated for or about in the workplace, sometimes without that organization even knowing or understanding, because like organizations are not good at some of these sort of invisible conditions, right? The maternity leave thing, right? All of these sort of structural double standards and biases that are like, when you say work about the work, and then there's this layer of other stuff on top.
Like humanity's getting in the way of being a cog in the machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think, I think that would be something that's quite appealing and sort of, liberating to sort of hear this sort of story of like, yeah, it wasn't like I need to like get out of here because all of these things. But if I do this, then my balance is different, right? Yes, I'm taking on a lot more risk and like, I'm out there sort of pitching my services, and it's a bit different than clocking into your, 9 to 5 or 9 to 9 or whatever, right? But then there's these advantages, right? Time with the kids and like the sort of considerations for your health and other things that sort of balance it out. I imagine it wasn't easy to make this transition. What are some of the big challenges that you face along the way? How did you conquer them?
Oh, that's such a great question. And it's such an important question to ask that as well. Like, what challenges did we face along the way? It was myself and my community as well who works with me in this transition too, right? So when you say to your spouse, hey, listen, like, I'd really love to become an entrepreneur. And you have to take like their risk tolerance into consideration, and like, what are their perspectives? What are their needs as well? Like, you're a partnership at the end of the day, and you're making a decision that affects both of you and your kids and your household, and you're agreeing to take on risk, right? So I think it's really important to be very open and transparent and collaborative and set boundaries with people who, are reliant on you and who you rely on too, to show up every day, right? So we set some parameters. When it first happened, we set some parameters of like, okay, what it needs to look like in order for our family to feel healthy, in order for this to make sense, right? And that will be so unique to different families. Everyone's going to have a different structure, what their boundary box looks like, right? And it's not you, the entrepreneur, saying, well, I need this and I'm going to do all these amazing things and you're going to support me, otherwise don't love me. It's nothing like that. It's about compromise and curiosity and being mutually supportive. And, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, maybe over time you'll finish that cake, but it's for everybody, right? You never buy a birthday cake for yourself most of the time anyway. If you do like this, you eat that cake. It's great. But after we agreed that it was a step that our family was open to, I stepped into it, and I did so much trial and error. And the first thing I learned is that entrepreneurship is really lonely and complex, and it's a massive undertaking. At the same time, it's invigorating, challenging, inspiring, and there's a lot of optimism involved too. Like, you have to be a little bit crazy, I think, in like a good way. Like, you have to have, as Robin Williams says, like that little spark of madness, and that's enough to like light up your life, right? So those some of the challenges that I faced was that it just felt really solo. I'm not a tech startup. I do plan to productize my services over time. However, I want more data before I do that. And so there's a huge movement in Calgary and throughout Canada, the US, like internationally, a lot of support for tech startups. However, non-tech startups need a little bit more community, I think. And so I've been expanding my network, going to entrepreneurship events, women's business events, everything that I can to build a network. And I've met remarkable, powerful people who I'm just so proud to know, and the most unlikely contacts have been the most valuable. Like, people who I underestimated or whom I didn't understand well enough were the people who, when I decided to get curious about and take a shot with, like, not an actual shot, but like, take a shot at coffee with, maybe, I don't know, this is networking style and figure it out. But yeah, but like, I would speak with them and I would find just a world of opportunity would open up like an oyster with a pearl, it was phenomenal. So the next thing is that everyone has advice or criticism, yet truly most do not know what you're going through. So it's wonderful when people get curious and ask you questions about what you're doing and what it is. And it's wonderful when they feel concerned for you, because it does look insane from the outside. You're doing so many different things. You become a master of so many different trades when you start a business. And so you also have to understand that there's going to be a lot more pressure to put you in a box where people feel like they need you to be. And that's what I realized in my network. I noticed a shift is that a lot of people thought of me as this really friendly, outgoing project leader, or a project manager they worked with years ago. And they're having trouble accepting a new identity, this metamorphosis, this transformation, So it challenged my community to grow with me. And a lot of them have, and a lot have grown in the community a lot as well. But then there's some people who have maybe just faded away from that community because I don't match their expectations of who Stephanie was in their universe for so long. And that makes them uncomfortable. And you have to be okay with shedding that and just walking through it and keeping your head high and trusting yourself. So that's how I guess I would say I'd overcome it, is through trusting myself and by having meaningful conversations with people who are really close to me.
I love that. I think it's fascinating. And honestly, I love that word metamorphosis. And, I see people, and I see it kind of come up actually a little bit more, the sort of, yeah, maybe your community and the people around you sort of transform a little bit as you transform. And that's probably okay, in the sense that it might not be sort of everyone's flavor or something they feel like they can support.
Sure.
And on the other hand, the people who are the unlikely folks, in your network, or like, I like the way you use the word community because I think this describes it well. These folks who, yeah, you're like, I don't know if they're my people, and suddenly end up kind of being very supportive or very helpful. Or if you're curious about it, there's something that you can learn from them and they can learn from you, even if it from the outside doesn't look like you'll sort of see eye to eye or even get along.
Absolutely.
I do like that distinction too of like, I mean, I don't know if you see it as distinct, but this notion of like network, people and community, people who are like supporting you, they're in your corner. And what I love about it is that for some folks listening and considering, an entrepreneurial path, who maybe don't have a spouse and maybe aren't close to their family and already feel alone, and they're like, oh, I'm going to get lonelier. Like maybe I shouldn't do this. And maybe they shouldn't, but also you can create community to support you. And then, man, I can't, coming back to the parameters bit at the beginning, like, I think that's so huge. And like, yes, with family, especially if you've got, dependents and a partner or a spouse, but actually just, any way along the way, what are your parameters for success of like, knowing whether or not it's working, not just as a business, is my business succeeding, but like, is my life succeeding along with it, or what's the trade-off?
I love that. Yeah.
Do you have like an example of a parameter that was kind of like more personal than business? Like, oh, if I'm not doing this thing 3 days a week, then my life is out of whack and I'm spending too much time trying to grow a business.
Those are definitely like I can relate to that type of parameter. And I have to say that we've taken on a much more flexible approach in what it looks like in our household. Like one of the advantages to me starting a business was to start slow. And a lot of the time when people go into entrepreneurship, they feel like they have to do this 24 hours a day, hustle, 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 never sleep, never see anyone. It's all of this. Like like you talk to a lot of the sales gurus out there, they're wonderful and well-meaning, but they're very male oriented, and they're also not very family oriented or community oriented. They're really business oriented, which you do get burnt out when you've done it. I've done that before. I've tried it, and it's not healthy. So some of the parameters that we set is, okay, well, now that we have the opportunity, like I've got much more time and flexibility while being strategic about what I am building and putting time to that every single day. It's not going to be a 12-hour a day shtick. It's going to be, I'm going to take care of my kids in the morning. I'm going to make sure they have a nutritious breakfast. I'm going to hug them when they feel sad about drop off, and I'm not going to rush them. And that's very meaningful to us, and then I have opportunities to just take care of some of the infrastructure, this window project that I told you about when we were talking, it's been wonderful, but it's also been very time consuming, and as long as I know what my priorities are, and that is growing the business and like being very clear about what we do and what we don't do, then you see how much the work about work falls away. You see how when you have your priorities in place, you focus on value driving efforts only. And when you cut the fat, you do about 3 to 6 hours of focused work a day. And that's built on growing, and that's including some mistakes, and that's including some nuance, but that's also very strategic. Like there's a lot of sales, there's a lot of relationship building, there's a lot of service offering. There's also project work, like with active clients, there's some hiring involved of like external consultants. So you just focus on what truly matters. And that's when you're a business owner, you need to think like a CEO, no matter how big your company is, if it's one person or 50 people, you have to think like a CEO, and you have to know the value of your time, because it doesn't just affect you if you have a family and a community. It affects everybody, and if you are solo and if you don't have family and community, you really need to understand what health and care look like for you, and understand it's not your fault where you're at. And it's really important for you to prioritize, okay, when you have a hard vision of like, okay, if I work 12 hours a day and I get this goal, I'll be happy. It's like, well, what does health and longevity look like to you? And so how do you want to split your time? Do you maybe want to diversify some of those business building efforts into building community and taking some time to really care about, your health and your future. So that's a long-winded answer. But yeah.
Honestly, I love your call out of like hustle culture, and like some of the like audience that it's directed at, but that it's not the only way to do it. Like, becoming an entrepreneur doesn't mean, like you're doing all the, drinking all the 10x juice and like working 18 hours a day, like it can.
Right.
And that's one way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it. And I think one thing that might be, at least for me, it is, right? It's kind of jarring to sort of wrap my head around is this notion of like working 3 to 6 hours a day. And I'm like, immediately, my like 8-hour a day or 12-hour a day brain, I come from an agency background. We track our time, billable hours, it's like much of the world is still built around, or at least, in circles I travel in my world, like it's built around 9 to 5 culture, like commuting and like having lunch, the downtown financial district and all this, blah, blah, blah. And like putting in your 8 hours. And then suddenly you're like 3 hours. I didn't even work, but you could make such a big impact. Suddenly it's not hours. People even think like in the consulting world, and I mean, it is true, right? The business is built on hours for service, but like growing your business isn't. You could do 3 hours that could land your next 3, 5, 7 contracts. It could expand your network. You could have connected with someone that will change the arc of your business forever.
Absolutely.
It might not take 8 hours. You might not fill 8 hours, and that might be okay. But to your point, you have to think like a CEO. You're not thinking like, did I put in my 8 hours a day? You're thinking, did I make an impact that's going to like grow my business, preserve my health as a leader of, either yourself or your employees? And, did it make a change? Did I make a difference today? Not did I put in 8 hours? It's such a like, I imagine that being a very difficult sort of, transition as well, a bit of a metamorphosis of, your concept of time.
Yes.
But I think that's really like an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of bias, I think, around entrepreneur culture, right? There's hustle culture. And then there's I don't see you working 18 hours a day. So you don't really have a business, do you, Stephanie? You're just like, you just chill and, you don't rush like your drop offs. This is like a lifestyle thing. And I mean, they're not wrong. It is it accommodates lifestyle, but it doesn't mean it's not a serious business.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I am doing it slow and that's intentional. We've had some really great clients, I've worked with some really great people. And that's from just being able to be focused on what actually matters. Right. But yeah, I love your perspective on that. And thank you for summarizing it so eloquently. As always, you do that so well. And it is hard to like kind of break out of that programming where we're like 8 to 12 hours a day. Like, okay, I've earned my salary, earned my keep. I've proven value. I've been so present and available, and the optics tick, 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 tick. Right. But is there going to be a perspective shift within yourself or within your organization or both, hopefully, where it says, okay, here are the outcomes that you need to provide. Okay. So what are like your strategy, then your KPIs for the year, and then how do you break that down into your projects or the efforts that you're doing by quarter? And then what is your daily roll up? Like, what does it look like as you're, ticking the boxes and stuff? And what's a distraction from strategy and value versus work about work versus, things that are in the gray area, right? And so it's important to think, okay, well, yeah, I might do these top 3 today, but I've got a list of 8,000 other things to do. So then are we pursuing the addiction of checking off things on our list, or are we changing our autopilot to be value oriented? And it's really hard to do that. And it takes a lot of time because I've been there. You give me a challenge, I'll go and I'll get it. I'll achieve it. Like, absolutely. You give me a work challenge, I'll do it half the time. I'll do it to impress. I'll double your expectations, right?
Give me an urgent deadline and like that's top of my list until it's done, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you have blinders on and like your family doesn't see or hear from you for 2 days, and it's like, well, that was great. I did that a lot in my 20s while battling a disease that's, like most people with celiac disease are undiagnosed. There's 300 signs and symptoms for it. And so they're pushing themselves even harder to prove themselves to be those high achievers. And that comes with consequences over time.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting is like something about your health that drives you to then kind of ignore your health to prove that you are something that's, yeah, exactly. Whereas, oh man, there's so much there.
There's so much there.
There's a whole nother podcast in there.
Yeah. It's like, are we thinking of our post-industrial, late capitalist kind of society with the edge of humanity? Let's unpack that for 5 seconds. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, let's land somewhere in between. Let's go to some of the the people pushing back, the naysayers, or, the folks who are maybe a bit skeptical, I think a lot of folks I talk to are sometimes like, yeah, it'd be great if I could do that, but I don't, I'm not looking at my savings account. I don't have, X number of digits in my bank account. I don't come from privilege, however they define that. Like, that's great for all these folks who are able to do that, who got good packages and have found an opportunity to like fund their way into entrepreneurship. But like, that's not possible for me. Is there sort of a situation where you're like, yeah, actually, not everyone can do this? And or is it sort of one of those things where you're like, like it's different for everybody? You opened with that, and I really appreciated that. Is this an option for everybody? And maybe who is it not an option for, this sort of entrepreneurial path?
I think that's a really wonderful question. And I think at the core of it, it's risk, right? We're identifying a risk profile, and like for very good reason as well. But whether or not one person should or shouldn't, I think it's more of a question of how, but not if, when, but not if. If you're really determined and this is something that you really want, I don't think there's a set of parameters that would disqualify you. People have done absolutely strange things. Bill Gates is a billionaire and he's a dropout. It's kind of like a where you look is where you go. So you could be in a really financially tight situation. You could be dealing with personal health issues. You could be dealing with community or social issues or socioeconomic issues. They're very common. Like most of Canadians carry credit card debt, right? So I think that people really don't want to accumulate more risk in their life when they feel like the day-to-day is so hard. But there's different ways that you can start this journey. Like I first incorporated in 2017, and then I took on full-time roles as well. And it was a very elastic start to my entrepreneurship journey. And then I incorporated again in 2022, thinking, yeah, it's a really good time for me to start this business. And then I took on another director role, so I call it, sometimes I get accidentally hired, which is in itself, but your network really helps me with that, And so, yeah, it's really different. But what I was doing when I was taking care of my kids, and I was dealing with young toddlers, and I still have a young toddler as well. I have 6 and 2 right now, is I just would learn about it. And I would think, okay, well, if I were to design a value proposition, what were the top 3 things that I would stop myself? What's an elevator pitch? You just go through practicing elevator pitches for your services or for a product, and then just when you have the energy for it, like think about when your energy peaks throughout the day. I just take an hour or so to think, okay, well, if I had all the freedom in the world for just this hour to focus on a business, what would it look like? And how would I put some words to it? And how would I want to build it? Well, how would it take shape? And I did so much of that. And it all, like, I'd say 80% of the work that I did is completely gone, and 20% is what's driven a valuable business. So it's kind of the 80-20 rule. It's a lot of grind, it's a lot of experimentation and exploration and getting to know yourself and testing out the market, right? For what works. I looked into app development, and it was a really quite a trip, and it took years to get to this place. It wasn't just when I had received my last package, which I was very privileged to get. I'm very grateful for that. It was years in the making of being like mildly distracted and obsessed with the want to become an entrepreneur, because I knew there was going to be a way that I could design a life for myself to an extent, right? It's not all glorious, and like you don't get to choose your schedule perfectly. Like if you want to contact, like you have to show up for the meeting. Like you can't just like time block 40 of your hours of your week. Like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
You have to work with what the market wants as well. Like you're still providing value. You still have to be customer oriented, right? Get to know what entrepreneurship would look like on you and decide if that's what you want. Do you want this responsibility? Do you want all these different hats? Do you like the risk profile? Do you want to start slow, or do you want to dive in? Like, what are your options? Then be realistic. It's okay to start where you are. It doesn't have to look like a Bob Ross painting at the end. That's not how he starts.
Happy little trees and clouds everywhere.
Yeah, okay, some titanium white.
There's 2 things that I find really interesting about that. One, the classic overnight success syndrome, right? Where it's like, oh, you started a business, you must have come up with it yesterday. No, that was like 7 years in the making. You know what I mean? Like it was gestation, it was planning. And to your point, it was that risk profile of like, when is the right time? Maybe not now. You incorporated in 2017, maybe not now, 2020, maybe not now. but it's not like it wasn't part of your roadmap, which I think is really interesting. The other bit I really like is like, I have a background in business development as well. You have a background in sales and business development. And we're talking elevator pitch. And, I know a lot of people who are like just so allergic to that idea of like, having an elevator pitch or like sales. But what I find interesting about it is that there wasn't really anything sort of icky about your description. A lot of the time, that elevator pitch is about testing your value. Like, is this valuable? Does this get people interested? And if you tie it back to the community thing, like that's how you get people interested in supporting you when you're able to sort of cast a vision. It's not like, hey, want to buy a watch, 2-for-1 deal. Like, tell you what, like imagine, the Scream horror series meets, like Apocalypse Now. It's like it's not the sort of like icky pitch that people kind of envision when they hear the word elevator pitch. It's a brief way to sort of compartmentalize your value and assess it. Either you assess it or other people evaluate it, and you're kind of testing without saying, listen, let me sit you down for 4 hours. I'm going to explain my business to you. You tell me if it's good or not. I tell you what, everyone's going to tune out after the first hour. And after the fourth hour, they're going to say, sounds good.
Sounds good. And like that might be 15 minutes in too. You might get the sound good 15 minutes in.
Yeah, sounds good. But it's like that little value test of, do I think it's valuable? And then if I think it's valuable, does someone else think it's valuable? And it's not like this icky pitch. I mean, it could be, I guess, but like that's not the way you're framing it. It's like, what is the seed of value that will get people interested, and where can I grow that?
And like, what is the seed of value that'll get people interested, and where can I grow that? You couldn't have put it better, right? It's truly the case. Like, you have to be about people. You have to be willing. You have to be obsessed with providing value and building relationships. Yes, money's really, really important. Like, that's how your business will survive. But you can't get to that reward point without authenticity. Without being transparent and building those relationships and sharing what real value is, and like planting that seed, right? Like, it can take 6+ months to get someone to sign on board in a B2B relationship. And that's fast sometimes, especially in the Canadian market right now, right? Like, it's really about networking and developing these things and seeing what works and what doesn't. And you might try like smaller initiatives or international initiatives, to make profit.
It takes time, but I love that sort of authenticity angle. I mean, I think, we talked about a little spark of madness and being obsessive, but being obsessive about people and delivering value.
Yes, exactly. You're absolutely right. That's the right thing to be obsessed about.
Just to kind of like round out, we've been talking about this sort of entrepreneurial path. And I kind of framed it at the outset as something that's like, this is happening. Sometimes it seems like the only viable option, but like realistically, it's not the only viable option. What other alternatives are there out there for folks who are sort of at like the midpoint of their career as a project leader, or maybe beyond it? Like, what are other options? What would you have done if you hadn't gone the entrepreneurial route?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I love it because there are so many different alternatives. And it's really a matter of how well and how willing you are to reframe your business case of value to the pivot that you want to make, right? So say entrepreneurship is not a path that you're interested in taking, and that's valid. Like, nobody needs to do that. Just because we see it everywhere we scroll doesn't mean that that is what you should be doing and that is what is going to make you happy. So there are many different alternatives, right? So you can become an independent contributor. You can certainly take on consultancy and advisory roles. And I think there is such an advantage to being a midpoint professional because you have a solid idea of who you are, what you like and don't like, and won't say yes to anything at all. Like, when you're in your 20s and you're starting your career and it's like a lot of yes. Like, I don't know if you can relate to that, but I was definitely like obsessed with people pleasing. And I said yes to absolutely everything because I wanted to prove my worth. And I really wanted people to value me there, and to like me. And then you grow out of that, you see there's not as much value in it, and then when you get to the midpoint of your career, you're more value focused and you see the value of $1 and a fleeting hour, right? So you know that you can't just spend every last minute of your day saying yes to all these inane requests people haven't even evaluated against strategy. It's just, you have to be critical and you have to be okay with that shift in that discovery because that's called growth. So you can look at leadership roles or fractional work as well. So if you take your picture of project management professional experience, project experience, and you think, okay, well, here's all of the skills that I've accumulated. Here's everything really, really technical, and I've got lots of great soft skills. Well, then also look at what the skills are to be like a VP of operations or a VP of customer excellence, and think about how your resume actually does translate into that resume. Think about how your business case, when you're talking to these C-suite executives, comes to life when you express your value to them in a strategic role. Learn how to reframe yourself, hire a coach, hire somebody to help you understand your value in the context of a role that you'd really like to shift into. Because understandably, like if you're managing programs or projects a lot of the time, you might want variety. You might see a lot of value in making some strategic changes, but you don't hold the carrots. But you know that you could tailor your value package essentially to do that in an organization, right? So it's about reframing and about building those relationships and building that network, right? So if you want to become an entrepreneur, you have to think, okay, well, what's your risk tolerance too, right? So family, health bills are all different factors, your network as well. And so just do the research and ask the questions and have people challenge you in what these alternatives are. Like, why do you want to change? And why don't you want the entrepreneurial route? And play devil's advocate with a few of your different perspectives that feel really comfortable with you, and then see what resonates and just cut the rest and start building towards your goal.
What I find really fascinating is that all of the things you said earlier about becoming an entrepreneur apply equally to if you wanted to like make a change as a project leader, but not become an entrepreneur. Like, figure out what you want, put together the puzzle pieces of your skills and see if it makes a full puzzle. If it doesn't, maybe try and fill in some gaps, maybe, get some kind of certification that takes you to where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And build your pitch, right? Build your elevator pitch of why you'd make a great whatever you want to be. And instead of pitching it to customers, you're pitching it internally, or you're pitching it in a job interview of how your story comes together to make a different role. And then, of course, even just swinging around to the beginning of what you said, which is also if you want to just stay a career project manager and that's what you want to do, also fine. That's also an option. And if you wanted to make a change, the skill is actually sort of having a vision for what you want to do, seeing what skills you've accrued along the way and putting those together into a pitch of some sort, that your value proposition, your personal brand, whatever you want to call it, but you can then mobilize that into change.
I love that. You're so great at summarizing these wonderful conversations that we have. Ultimately, it's a mindset. Be the CEO of your life, of your career. And it doesn't mean becoming an entrepreneur. It just means taking control over your path, right?
Boom. That was a good one.
Boom.
Awesome. Let's wrap it there. That's a great spot to end.
Boom is a good place to end. Yeah.
Boom is a good place to end. Steph, thanks so much for spending the time with me today. Honestly, it's always fun. I had so much fun today. And honestly, we covered a lot of ground.
We certainly did. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to these wonderful questions. Thank you so much for your time and for taking the interest in exploring this with me. And I really had a great time talking to you. As always, it's truly a pleasure.
All right, folks, there you have it. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation with over 1,000 like-minded project management champions, come join our collective. Head over to thedigitalprojectmanager.com/membership to learn more. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on thedigitalprojectmanager.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.